Welcome to the PrisonPOD, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. PrisonPOD, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Welcome to the Prison Pod. The following podcast discusses mature and sensitive topics, including sexual offenses, the sex offender registry, and related issues. Listener discretion is advised. Today's guest will be Holly Bott. She served a 12-year sentence in a Minnesota women's prison. Holly is an author, a speaker, and a certified biblical counselor. She draws on her own experiences and personal journey of faith. Holly writes and speaks candidly about shame, grace, and second chances. We welcome her to today's Prison Pod. Hi, Holly.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
I've had a chance to read about half of your book, so I definitely want to just give you a quick plug for your book. If you would tell people the name and title of your book and where they can find it.
I have a copy right here. And so the name of the book is From Surviving to Living, and you can get it on all your major retailers, Amazon, and wherever you like to buy books. I think if you just Google my name, Holly Bott, and the title of the book, you'll find it.
Okay. I'm going to try to be as sensitive as possible today during our discussion. I want to be respectful to you and our listeners. I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit about your life before your conviction, if there were any major events or significant struggles that were going on at the time.
I would be happy to. So, at the time of my offense, I was married for the second time. I was in my second marriage. We had 5 children total, 1 from my first marriage and 4 from the marriage that I was in at that time. And, I suffered seriously from depression. I had since about age 18 and had been taking all sorts of medications. Doctors will switch things around trying to help you. No matter what I was given, I never really felt better. And so by the time I committed my crime, I was 34 years old, and I've been taking these medications for a number of years. My marriage was not good at all. We had separate bedrooms. We really hated each other, or I guess I can't speak for him, but it appeared that neither one of us liked the other one very much. And I wanted a divorce, but I was afraid if I took that step. First of all, how would I afford life with 5 children and without a second income? And then what would my family think? I grew up in a Christian home that was very rigid and strict. Divorce was a no-no. I had already been divorced once and was the black sheep of the family for that and probably other reasons. And so the fact that I had depression, that also was seen in my family as a weakness, like a shameful thing we don't talk about. If you take medication for it, you've doubled the shame because it was just silly. And so I had all sorts of invading fears about how I would be perceived if I took certain steps. And I would always be thinking about how I'd already made terrible decisions that were reflecting poorly on me. And so it was a lot of stress. And by the time I reached 34, I was suicidal. And not just that, but I was looking for ways to commit social suicide. I just wanted everyone to leave me alone. And I wanted the pressure off. And so that's kind of where I was at leading up to the events of my crime.
Well, I would assume that also, even though you were ostracizing people in your life away from you, that you had a great deal of loneliness going on.
I did. I was very lonely. And the reason is that I had believed that appearing perfect was very important to being liked. And I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be approved of, which meant that if someone asks me how I'm doing, I have to say, fine, great, everything is great. And it was not fine. It was not great at all. So there came this dichotomy or a contrast of I'm not asking for help and I am trying to project a perfect life. And at the same time, everything's falling apart. And this bitterness or resentfulness began to grow in me because as I thought about my family and friends, I thought if you really cared about me, you would know well enough that I am not fine. In fact, if you just came over to my house, then you would see I'm not fine. That we have separate bedrooms. Does nobody care that me and my husband are sleeping in 2 separate bedrooms? It's an obvious sign something's wrong. And yet everybody just took it at face value. And so and I'm not saying any of this is rational. It's just how it felt at the time, which led to, I was already poorly coping. And, that led to more poor.
Speaking about coping, how did you find those coping skills when you were inside? Because I would imagine as a mother with 5 children, it must have been terribly hard on you to be in prison. And did you have a support system while you were there?
Prison is such an interesting culture. It's a transient culture and it's an ambiguous culture. So when we grow up and before any crime happens, before any incarceration happens, we adopt coping skills, good or bad, but a way to navigate our life. When you get to prison, none of those strategies will help you there. And you are thrown into a completely different culture. And what makes it more challenging is the transient nature of the place that you are. Very few people have been there long enough to tell you what you need to know in order to adjust quickly. And the stressor is you must adjust quickly because it could be dangerous for you in many ways if you don't. And so no one can give you what you need. There's no class because it's not just that people come and go, but that the culture changes so quickly because people come and go. And that's where I found myself. I had never known anybody, to my knowledge, of course. I'm sure I knew people and just wasn't aware they had been to prison, but I didn't drink. Didn't do drugs. I'm not saying I never drank or did drugs, but I was not a drug user or an alcoholic. And that was like a foreign world to me. And incarceration was all foreign world. It was also a foreign world to my family. So when I entered prison, there was really no help they could give me. It's not like they could say, hey, let's call up our old friend who did 20 years and get him in contact with Holly and it'll make it better. Nobody, to my knowledge, was able to provide real strategies for practical life. And to be clear, my family loved me, but they were very angry with me. Now, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but it appeared to me that I had embarrassed them. And so I was making the family look bad and ruining their reputations. And so even if they could have provided more, they were not willing to for many years. And that was very hard.
Now, the crime that brought you to prison, did that cause more problems when you went in?
I can't say because I don't know what it would have been like for me with a different type of charge. But the prison that I was at was a women's prison, all women there. And there was maybe the population fluctuated between 500 to 800 women right in there. So it's not a huge prison. And it's the only women's prison in the state of Minnesota, state prison. So women of every offense level, from minimum security all the way to supermax, were at this prison. So mass murderers, serial killers, and people who had a DWI were all in the same. And they did not separate our activities or privileges based on custody level. And what made it even more strange is this prison didn't even have a fence. It just looked like a college campus in a suburban neighborhood where you could just walk off. We wore street clothes. And it's strange that almost never happened, that someone tried to leave. And there were lifers there, life without parole. So it was a very strange, nothing like I thought it would be from Hollywood or TV or whatever. And I say all that to say that the population demographics were also very different from a men's prison. 700 women there, only 12 of us at the time had a sex-related offense. And that included prostitution, which is a sex offense, being a pimp or a female pimp, that's a sex offense, and human trafficking. That all 12 included crimes like that. And so there wasn't this huge backlash. I mean, how would you even know which ones we are? There's only 12 of us, and a prison is a small city. So I know that in men's prisons in Minnesota anyways, 25% of the population is there for a sex-related offense. And so that's a fourth of the men, as opposed to less than 1% of the women. So for the men, can be a very dangerous experience, a very serious experience. For me, not so much.
Okay, I was curious if there was a difference between the opinion of men and women in that situation. At the facility you was at, did they have a program for anyone that was um, accused of a sex offense?
Yes. So there was actually a lot of programming at the prison that I was at, all kinds. In fact, so many programs that the federal government sent out a group to talk to us inmates about the programs that we had available because they wanted to duplicate that on a federal level. So an unusual prison, I suppose. And I'm not saying it was a great prison, it's just different. Um, and for women in Minnesota, sex offender treatment is front loaded, which means you do it at the beginning of your time. For the men in Minnesota, sex offender treatment is backloaded or end loaded. You do it at the end of your time, which is bizarre. I mean, how are you supposed to put into practice what you've learned if you're immediately thrust into the public when you finish? It's bizarre. So I was grateful that for me, within a year and a half of walking in the prison, I was being entered into the treatment program, and I learned so much about coping strategies that were healthy and putting those into practice. It was like a year-long program. Well, 6 months to complete, and then another 6 months of after treatment, I guess they call it.
Can you speak of a positive experience from going to prison?
I can. Actually, there were many positive experiences at the prison there. Most of them happened the second half of my incarceration because the first half, or even more than the first half, I was so traumatized and so angry and so, I was a chaos in my mind. And I was on antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, antidepressants. I was really quite an agitated, difficult individual, very difficult individual, often in trouble. And so the first half was, I think, normal. People just need time to adjust. I saw the guards as the enemy, and some of these guards were really nice people, but everybody was the enemy to me, us versus them. The second half was when I really changed, not because I was trying to change. It was, for me, it was Jesus that came to me. And I was not looking for him. I was not looking for religion or anything else. But Jesus showed up in my life like a ton of bricks with supernatural events, and many supernatural events that caused me to realize he is real. He is real, real. And when you see something like that in person and you experience it in person, then you have to rethink everything, which I began to do. And I began reading the Bible, and there's good advice. There's good coping in there. If you need good advice for how to cope with things, how to act right, just read that and start doing there's some real clear, easy to read things in there about how to navigate life in a healthy way. So for me, the first thing that changed is little things. I read a verse in the Bible that says you're supposed to provide for your family. I wasn't. In Minnesota, slavery is legal in the prison system, and so we made about $6 a month for full-time work. But we had to provide for ourselves at retail pricing: shampoo, dishwashing, soap, clothes, everything. So it's not feasible, and there certainly isn't any left over. And even if there was, even if I sent my whole paycheck home, what would my family do with $6 a month? I just didn't see that as being useful. So I wasn't sending any home. But when I read this verse, it actually said, he who doesn't provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever, because even they do this. And I could recall there were several women around me who were ordered by the state to pay child support, and it was garnished from their $6 paycheck. But they would then put in overtime to make up the difference so that they could pay for the things that they needed. And they were cheerful. They were generous with what they had. And I was so depressed, I could barely get out of bed. I certainly wasn't putting in any overtime, and I was not cheerful, and I had all of my checks. So this verse was true for me. I was worse than them. So I began to send money home. I mean, it was like $8 every couple of months, and it was extreme discipline to get myself to do that. And that was something else supernatural that Jesus did. I was very financially foolish. I did not listen. If this was something I could have done prior to this, I would have done it in order to prove I'm a good person and to perform and get a applause. I would have been desperate to do it knowing that would have happened, and I lacked the ability. I had tried and failed. I mean, I was 40 years old by this point. If I could have done it, I'd have done it by now. And yet Jesus showed up and made it happen. And so my family began to take a look, like maybe she's changing, which was not my intent. In fact, I didn't even know if they'd received the checks. My husband, who's now my ex-husband, he really hated me by this point for sure. And we were not on speaking terms. We hadn't spoken for years. So when I dropped the first check, I had not been able to tell him, hey, I'm going to be sending you this money home. You can expect it. So he'd have no idea. And I imagined him getting an envelope from me and thinking, oh, I don't want to hear anything she has to say, and throwing it away without opening it and hear all this hard work and suffering. And he doesn't even know there's money. Or even worse, what if he opens it and there's this little check and he uses it to mock me in front of the kids? Look, kids, your mom thinks we need $8. How stupid is she? All these fears went through my mind. So I thought as I'm doing this that I'm opening myself up to further suffering and ridicule, not applause. And yet I still did it and was able to do it. And that was huge for me to take steps like that. So once I began to make small changes and it worked, I began to think, what else can I do? How else can I make good changes? And then I started to have positive experiences at the prison because I was seeing everything differently. I was questioning all the previous ideas I thought I had and willing to take good risks and have new experiences. I was afraid of people. I had a fear of conflict, a fear of looking vulnerable, of appearing vulnerable. I hated asking for help. All these things I began to rethink. I started asking for help and receiving help because I was asking, which caused me then to see people differently in a less harsh light and even a friendly light, truly begin to feel supported for who I really was, not who people might think that I was.
Thank you for clarifying that and speaking on that. We're going to take a brief break here and we'll be right back. I want to remind our listeners we're talking with Holly Bott.
Music by Stir Crazy Music. www.stircrazymusic.com.
Okay, we're back. Hi, Holly. Sorry about interrupting you in the middle of a conversation, but we have to make sure to bring our messages in. So, did you have any circle of friends or anything that were participating in any religious groups within the prison? Or was it just the idea that you had picked up the Bible and started reading on your own?
I did not do religious programming. So it was just that I picked up a Bible. And I had, like I said, I grew up in a Christian family. I'd been to church. My parents sent me to a Christian school for elementary and middle school. So I had been in that world, but I had never actually read the Bible like a book. And I'm an avid reader. I had only opened it when we're at church and the pastor tells you where to open it. He tells you what it means and you go home. And so the prison went on a long lockdown. I'm sure most of the people watching your podcast know what a lockdown is. And so we were in our room 24 hours a day for an extended period of time. It was like maybe 2 weeks or something. And I ran out of library books that were in my room. So then all I had left to read was this Bible. And my opinion at the time was this was the most boring book in the world. I didn't understand it, pure drudgery. And so I was like, I can't believe this is all I have left. This is the worst day ever. But I decided to read it because I don't like sitting and doing nothing. And it was that day the most interesting book I've ever read. It was captivating. It was like better than any of my favorite authors. And I read it the rest of the day. I fell asleep with it in my hands. And here's what became strange. The next day, I woke up bright and early in the morning, excited to read it some more. And I say that is surprising because my depression was so bad there were periods of time more than once where I couldn't get out of bed for months or had to drag myself out of bed for minimal things. Barely made it to work. I'm surprised I wasn't fired. If I was scheduled 3 days a week, I'd work one. And I'm just shocked I wasn't fired. I would go months without taking a shower, years without brushing my teeth because everything was the effort. And I was so determined to remain in contact with my kids, writing letters and phone calls, that took up all my energy just dragging myself to the phone for a phone call a week and things like that. So I was certainly not the person who was bouncing out of bed full of excitement at 6 a.m, ready to take on the day. That was not me at all. So the fact that I was a little frightening to me, not because I don't want this, but what is going on? This, like you said, I'm 40 years old, and this is not something I have done. I had agendas in the past of how to get better. I'd read books about depression. I'd seen multiple counselors, multiple psychiatrists. I talked about it. I read about it. I tried everything. Nothing had worked. I am, at this point, just coping. I'm like, I guess I'm never going to get better, and I have to figure out how to live with this disability. Now, without any plan, I'm bouncing out of bed, excited about the day. So I read that book, read the Bible again all day, fell asleep about midnight with it in my hand, and the third day, I also woke up bright and early, excited. On the contrast, I was afraid because I'd never had a supernatural experience in my life or anything I couldn't explain as I had something to do with it. Or I know what to attribute to it, another person or an event. And this had none of that. So, I kept reading it, and God started doing other crazy things like that. And I'll tell you why this mattered to me. I wrote my children each, all 5 of them, their own letter once a week. And I had my entire incarceration. And I also called at least once a week. However, the stressors of the outside world were very great on them because of my incarceration. And especially my ex-husband wanted my children to hate me as much as he did, which they refused to do, but he tried. That was stressful. And the community around them, their friends at school, teachers, social workers, were telling my children stereotypical things about people in prison, not good things. And so all of this bombardment of negativity while they tried to, think of me as the mom that they love was hard. So there might be months when they would not read my letters. They just needed a break from it, good or bad. And they wouldn't answer the phone. And then they'd be recharged. They'd come back, read them again. But this cyclical type of thing led to a disconnect. So 5 years in, at the point when I have this experience with the Bible, the disconnect was really great between who I was and who I was writing to tell them that I was and who they believed that I was. And their children, they have no ability to discern the good information from the bad that they're receiving about me. So they kind of adopted the attitude that all this information was accurate and they were going to love me in spite of it. And children have needs, mostly subconscious, that they want parents to fulfill for love, respect, affirmation, approval, things like that, emotional needs. They were beginning to get the idea that I was not the person who could meet those needs, which created fear and anxiety and stress for them, wondering, will they ever get this from anybody if their parents are failing them? So this is where I'm at with my children 5 years into my sentence. And I would listen to them on the phone. They would express fears based on things that weren't true about me. I'll give you an example. I would write home and tell them about stories about their childhood. When you were 3, you did this and it was so cute. And your first word was this. I'm the keeper of memories. I was the stay-at-home mom. So let me make sure to pass that on to you. And then I would talk to them on the phone a few weeks later and they would say, you know what? You don't remember anything about our childhood. You don't care about the past. And I'm thinking, oh, well, that's a letter nobody read. So I just would think to myself, if you would only read my letters, you would not have all these fears and anxieties and you would know who I really am. Now I realized I had done that to God my whole life. For 40 years, he had written thousands of pages to me about his character, what he has done, what he will do, what he wants to do, his plans, his goals, all those things. And I hadn't gone to the source. Instead, I had taken secondhand information, which was true and not. It was both. It was a combination, and I had no ability to discern the difference. So I took it all in, accepted it as fact, and then developed fears and anxieties because I felt God needed to meet certain needs that I had, and I was coming to think maybe I need to love him in spite of He can't do it. And he was able to do for me what I could not do with my children. And that is supernaturally caused me to read what I was ignoring in order to clear up all my fear and anxiety and to know the truth. The only reason someone would do that, it's the only reason I would do it with my children, is relationship. I didn't write letters to get my children to perform better or to reflect better on me. I just wanted to know them and then to know me and us to enjoy our company. And I had always thought that God just wanted me to perform and achieve all the things my parents wanted for me. I just put that on God. He's on the same page as they are, and I'm failing. And now I recognized he just wants to enjoy my company and wants me to know him as he really is. So I read the Bible all the time and took the advice in it. When it comes to the religious programming, here's my thoughts. This was true in my mind for me at my prison. I'm not saying anything about other prisons or even the prison I was at, how it is today. But I felt I had been deceived so long, and I don't want to say deceived like my church never gave me any good information, but what I was reading in the Bible often was quite different than what I had been told by the church and other Christians was in it. It was very different. And so I felt like I couldn't trust anybody in the future for a long time to tell me what I should believe. I need to just read the Bible and that's it. And so I did that for many years. Nothing but the Bible, no other religious books, so that I could be confident if someone tells me something is in there and it isn't, I'll know. There were some other things. Churches are a meeting place in a prison. We lived segregated in units. We ate meals with our work sites. And even going to the gym or library, it wasn't like anybody could go at any time. So women who were dating other women, that's where you hooked up, was church, because everybody could go there. Or if you were passing contraband and you needed to get it from one unit to another, church was where you did it because we're all allowed there. I did not want to be seen as someone who's possibly distributing contraband or any of these other things that are against the rules. So I just didn't go to keep myself out of that scene.
I'm curious now, through all the years that you went to psychologists or counselors or whoever you reached out for help, did they ever address your spirituality?
Never.
In my opinion, from listening to you talk, you have had a spiritual death. You had lost your hope. You had lost your faith.
Yes.
That is a very serious thing that all those people involved in your life did not pick up on. Where's your spiritual base? Holly, do you believe in God? Do you believe in forgiveness? Do you believe there's anybody bigger than yourself out there? And that's one thing that bothers me sometimes with the medical profession. They forget sometimes very important things like religion, spirituality, and culture. So that's why I asked that question.
It was never brought up. In fact, in the state of Minnesota, anyways, as much as they have religious programming in the prisons, you're not allowed to talk about Jesus, or very little, and everybody's on edge. If you mention God, if you mention religion, there's it's not just a complete separation of church and state, but they have trashed the church, and it's all about the state. You're not even allowed to talk about God or Jesus or religion or spirituality. It is total taboo here. And, you'd asked me about my book. So the reason that I wrote it is I was writing to the old me. I really believe that if someone had said to me, spirituality matters. And not only that, when I entered prison with a 12-year prison sentence, for a sex charge, I felt utterly worthless and like I would have no future even after I got out of prison. So I was emotionally devastated. And if I had known that a future is possible, I would have started to heal sooner, because I would have believed it had value and was a worthwhile endeavor, but I didn't. And so writing my book, I write experientially how bad I was off emotionally, and then the change that happened. This part one is all these things we've talked about so far that are very difficult and are big stressors and why I felt I had no future. Part two is everything changed and I have a very bright future. And it's not because of me. This is not because Holly did something and Holly wants to tell you, do what she did. That's not it at all. It's not about what I did. It's about who I know. and that God is real. And he can do for me what he did for me, he can do for anybody else. And so I wanted to put that book out there so that, if at all possible, I can get this into hands of other people. They can feel hope and encouragement and have a sooner positive impact in their life.
So I had mentioned at the beginning that you are a biblical counselor. Do you do that privately? Do you do it in prisons? Whereabouts do you conduct that?
So I do it both. In Minnesota, if you are on someone's visiting list that is incarcerated, you cannot be a volunteer. In fact, volunteers who go in to do any type of programming are not allowed to have any personal relationship with anybody in the prison. You can't write letters to them. You can't have phone calls from them. You can't do emails. You cannot visit. There's a complete separation. I am also not allowed to be a volunteer ever in my life in Minnesota because I had a sex charge. That was 16 years ago, and I've been out of prison for 7 years, and yet I will never be accepted in without some special exception from the commissioner, which could happen. God can do anything, but I'm just saying the normal course of things, it won't be me. So I have chosen to be on visiting lists, and you can only visit 2 different inmates, period. I don't mean per day, like you can only be on 2 lists. So I'm on 2 people's lists, and I go in and visit them several times a week. But I also accept phone calls and emails from many inmates, not just inmates in Minnesota. I am friends with inmates in Florida who are in the jails there and in the prisons there, and I accept all their calls and I email them, trying to do what I can with what I'm allowed to do.
I don't always agree with them not allowing people back into the facilities or to do volunteer work because people learn from each other. And by people hearing your story, it can prevent something from happening, for one thing. It can give guidance if something does happen, and it gives somebody direction if something has happened. And the other thing is, I don't think we should be punished for the rest of our lives for something that we've done wrong. We certainly wouldn't do that to our children. We wouldn't do it to our pets, but we do it to all of our people that have been incarcerated. So I don't like that division. I do love the idea that you are continuing to do the work with people in other prisons. And the situation about not being able to stay in contact as a volunteer with other people, that same rule was in Maine, and we had to sign paperwork when we became volunteers. But Rick, who was the gentleman who went into prisons with me, and I refused to sign the papers because we knew some of the people we were working with, families. We knew them when they came home. We weren't supposed to have any contact, and that wasn't the mission of what we were doing. Our purpose was to befriend them while they were in, to be a support, to write letters, to visit, to take phone calls, and to support them when they came out. And that was a very unusual thing to happen. And I think it happens more now. But those restrictions on volunteers, I think, are damaging.
Yes.
The other thing is when people come out, they're not supposed to have anything to do with somebody who's been in prison or who is still in prison.
Yeah.
Now, if that's what your support system has been for 3, 5, 10, 20 years, where is your support system if you don't have family when you come home? So that's another issue. I think that's a very important subject that comes up as far as that, who you can and the rules and regulations around that.
Yes.
Can I ask something about when you came home, your children, were they still school-age children?
No. So when I went to prison, they were 16, 11, 10, 8, and 4. When I got out of prison, the older 3 were all adults in their 20s. And only my younger 2 were still school age. They were 16 and 12 when I got out. So I have 4 boys and then a girl. My youngest son was abused by my ex-husband, physical abuse, when I went to prison, and he almost died. A couple years into my sentence, I got a call down to the caseworker's office. My son was in the hospital receiving life-saving surgery, and they weren't sure he was going to make it because of abuse. Devastating, devastating. Prison is so hard not just because of what happens in prison, but because life still goes on, and there's nothing you can do about it but be a spectator. So stressful. So after that, he went into foster care, and he cycled through eventually 30 different foster homes and group homes. And they initially told me, just sign a waiver of your parental rights. It doesn't terminate your rights, but it makes him appear more adoptable if it looks like there will be no pushback from the parent if he finds someone who wants him. So I did that, but by the time I had just 2 years left and no one had adopted him, this had been going on for 3 years, right? I thought, you know what? I don't want that waiver anymore. I'm going to plan to have him when I get out. And as soon as I told them that, they moved to terminate my parental rights at a trial, which was so strange. And so it took 9 months to get to trial. I did lose my rights at the trial, as did my ex-husband. And my son just continued in foster homes. And I was told at that point, you can have no communication with him at all, and no one in your family can, not even his brothers and his sister. Nobody can, because he's not in the family anymore. When he's 18, that's the soonest. And this termination of rights happened just before his 14th birthday. And so that was very difficult. But just before I was released from prison, he was staying with a woman who was a case manager as well as a foster mom. And she offered to adopt him to get him out of this cycle of foster homes that they go through. And he agreed as long as his mom and dad remained his mom and dad, and he could talk to them right now. And she agreed to that. And so I called home one day to talk to my mom, and she said, "You'll never believe who I got a call from." And she told me what I just told you. And she said, "Here's the number. You can talk to him right now." And so I called and was able to resume my relationship with him before I walked out of prison. After I got out, this wonderful woman who did adopt him flew him out from Washington State to Minnesota. My ex-husband moved to Washington State when I went to prison, so my kids were thousands of miles away. She flew him back to Minnesota to spend Christmas with me. Right now, he's in my kitchen making breakfast. He lives with me now, and he has for some time. And so with my boys, everything, they were old enough when I went to prison, ages 8 to 16, to be firm in their resolution to remain in contact with me and have a loving relationship with me. And we were able to manage that and keep that when I got out of prison. I'm not saying that it was perfect, right? But it was hhealthy and wonderful, and it still is with them. My daughter, on the other hand, my ex-husband, while I was incarcerated himself a number of times and doing drugs and all sorts of things. And what happened with my youngest son made him paranoid regarding the rest of the children, that social services might come in. He wanted to remain in control. And so he gave my daughter away to a woman who agreed to, they didn't use the words abduction, but it was an abduction. She had to disappear from social media and from life, hide from my family. And she had to tell my daughter that she was the mom, not me, and just go off the grid. And she agreed to do this and disappeared with my daughter when last time I saw my daughter, she was 6. The last time I talked to her, she was 8. And now she's 19. I don't know where she is. I don't even know if she's alive or dead. And I've put out missing persons reports with the police to try to find her and make sure she's well, even if she doesn't want to come home. But I've gotten mixed bag of help from the police. Mostly I've received pushback of, you know what, if she's dead, you deserve it. I'm not helping you. I don't care. And I had full custody of my daughter in the divorce because of, my crime had nothing to do with my own children. And it was only a one-time, one-person crime. So when it came to my family and things, the courts were willing to make that distinction, and I retained custody of the kids, including my daughter, in the divorce. And so I could bring my papers to the police station and say, I have custody of my daughter. I don't know where she is. And they would say, I don't want to help you. You're a criminal.
I have a suggestion. Chances are, if she was that young and was told somebody else was their mother, they may not know any different. But that also being said, she may not look like anybody else in that family. She may question who she is, and she may have done her DNA. I would suggest you do your DNA and register it as open, because you'd be amazed how many people find missing relatives that way.
That's a good idea.
So I would try that, because you never know. Or
Yeah.
it might be one of those things out of the blue where she says, oh my God, this is a match, and this is either my grandmother, my aunt, or my mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would try that.
Yeah. I will do that.
So now when you came home, what were the circumstances? Where did you go to live, and did you have employment and a support system?
So I went to live with my parents, which was so surprising because the whole time I was in prison up till the very last year, my parents were telling me, "You will never come to our house. You're a horrible person. You've caused us nothing but grief. We are not going to help you in any way." And I would agree that that was a mutual feeling for the most part, right up until the last couple years. When I started reading the Bible and it says, honor your parents, I was like, how is that even possible in this situation? But I was willing to open my mind to try. And at first, my parents didn't believe I could. In fact, my mom actually said, that's impossible for you to honor us and to respect us. And I guess my old self, it would have been impossible, but was really determined and to show it. And so by the last year, they were convinced that I was a completely different person than the person that they knew. And they were excited for me to come to their house. They offered it. In fact, my mom couldn't wait for me to get out of prison. I remember one visit about 6 months before my release where we were talking and my mom said, "Oh, I just wish you could come home with me today. I can't wait 6 more months." So I went to live with them. And I lived with them for 2 years before I could afford to buy a house, and I did. Now I live in my own house. What was interesting about that is because of the abuse, my youngest son wasn't the only one of my children my ex-husband abused. He treated them all that way. And so my son, my second oldest son, his first, my ex-husband's first son, my second son, my parents went out to Washington for his high school graduation, and he had been kicked out of the house just before his senior year and was living with, I don't know who, someone who was willing to take him in. It wasn't an official foster system. But my son was so depressed that, and my mom's a nurse, that when she saw him, she was very concerned for his physical well-being. He was extremely malnourished, about 110 pounds, and just looked terrible. So they told him, you have to come home with us. And they took him home with them back to Minnesota immediately. And she began to nurse him back to health. So he's 18-year-old and living with them. And this is not long before I'm about to get out. He meets a girl here in Minnesota, and all of a sudden it's an abusive relationship on both sides. And he ends up going to jail twice for being arrested by her calling the cops on him and stuff. And he was incarcerated in the same jail where I started my sentence. That revolutionized his way of thinking because he might have loved me all this time, but I bet he adopted some of the self-righteous attitudes my ex-husband had, that she's no good, we're nothing like her. And now he was incarcerated twice before I got out of prison in the same jail where I started my stay. The first time you can think of it as a fluke, but the second time you're in there, you begin to think, I wonder if mom might have had some mitigating circumstances because I'm surprised to find myself here. I bet she was too. And so he got out of jail just a week before I got out of prison, and we were both living with my parents, him and me, and he was in his 20s at the time. That opened the door to such wonderful conversations about true forgiveness and true understanding between him and me, and it was so cathartic to be able to embrace him as he is and him to accept me truly for what had happened and to just love on each other. So that was a great support system. And my parents they brought their community around me. And so I had a lot of community support when I came out that I'm very grateful for.
Glad to hear that. And I'm very glad to hear that your story has a happy ending
It
because
does.
sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And, you have a really positive attitude and you're sharing what has happened to you, which can definitely help others that have experienced similar things. Do you wish that you had screamed to people that you weren't all right when everything was going on?
Yes, I wish I'd done many, many things different, but I was not capable at the time. I mean, I really did do the best with what I had. And that's not a criticism of people who helped me or people who raised me or even of me at the time. We are always learning. We are always growing older and progressing. And I just did my best and it just wasn't very good.
Well, that's why second chances are so important because so many times you hear people say, we are not the worst thing we have done. And, one event in our life should not define us as a human being for the rest of our life because there's so much more to us. And, so I really appreciate you taking the time today to share your story. If your book's right there, can you hold it up one more time?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so this is Holly Bott, and her book is From Surviving to Living. You can find her book on online
Booksellers.
booksellers. Thank you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today.
Yeah. And, you can go to my website, which is my name, hollybott.me. So not .com, but .me. And I will have updates on events, book signing events that I'm doing. The book is being translated into Spanish right now. So once the Spanish version is available, I will be having announcements about that on my website. And finally, something that is really important to me right now is getting this into the hands of the people I wrote it for, which is the number one target audience is incarcerated individuals right now. It is available for sale on many approved vendors for prisons around the country, but not all. And so I am working to donate large quantities to prisons where the inmates couldn't just buy it through the normal means, or even just, they don't have money. And I'm not making money on this book. I want everybody to do better. And I will spend any amount of money to get it into the hands of people at no cost to them so they can have it. So if there's any prisons out there who are looking for resources, contact me. I will give you as many free copies as you request anywhere in the United States.
I'll put the information on my social media also so that people know. And I maintain a book list of suggested readings, so I'll make sure it's there and there's a link where they can get it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to wind up another edition of the Prison Pod. We have been talking with Holly Bott today and discussing her life and her book and her faith. I really appreciate her joining us today. Stay tuned next week for another version of the Prison Pod.
Attention! Choreo, a better way to connect with loved ones who are incarcerated. Without Choreo, family and friends wait for a call and hope they can answer. With Choreo, inmates can call or message at any time. When your inmate calls their Choreo number, they will hear your voice and text messages. Inmates receive and leave messages at any time using standard prison phones, making connection easy and predictable. For information about Choreo, visit choreo.org. Stay connected.
You have been listening to the Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is PrisonPod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473.